She kept telling me I was imagining things. I believed her. Until I found a second phone hidden in our bedroom. I opened it expecting nothing. Instead, I saw one message that changed everything I thought I knew about my wife. My wife, Emily, and I had been married for 6 years, and honestly, I thought we had a pretty normal marriage. We both worked, paid our bills, had dinner together most nights, and spent our weekends doing the usual boring married couple stuff. From the outside, there was nothing about us that looked broken. Then Emily started talking about a coworker named Ryan. First, I didn't think anything of it. She worked for a marketing company, and Ryan had joined her department about 8 months earlier. She mentioned him occasionally, usually because he'd helped her with a project or said something funny at work. I didn't care. Everyone has coworkers. But slowly, Ryan's name started showing up in our conversations more and more. Ryan thinks we should change the presentation. Ryan sent me this hilarious video. Ryan stayed late too, so we grabbed something quick to eat. I remember one night asking, "You guys work together a lot?" Emily looked at me like I'd asked the dumbest question in the world. Obviously, he's my coworker. I laughed and let it go. The first thing that actually bothered me happened on a Thursday night. Emily came home almost 2 hours later than usual. She walked through the door, dropped her purse on the kitchen counter, and immediately started explaining that work had been crazy. I wasn't accusing her of anything. I simply asked, "Everything okay?" She said, "Yeah." "Why?" I told her she was late. She sighed and said, "I told you, work has been crazy." Then, almost defensively, she added, "Ryan was there too, if that's what you're wondering." That caught me off guard. "I didn't even mention Ryan," I said. She stared at me for a second, then smiled. "I know, I'm just saying." I told myself I was reading too much into it. A few weeks later, Emily changed the password on her phone. That shouldn't have mattered. Everyone deserves privacy even inside a marriage. But she used to leave her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered or went outside. Suddenly, it was always with her. If she went to the bathroom, the phone went with her. If she took a shower, it was sitting on the bathroom counter. If she fell asleep on the couch, she'd wake up just to move it beside her. One night, I joked, "What are you hiding on that thing? Government secrets." She laughed and said, "Maybe I am." I smiled, but then she looked directly at me and said, "Seriously, don't start getting paranoid." That word stayed in my head. Paranoid. I hadn't accused her of cheating. I hadn't even mentioned Ryan. A few days later, I finally asked her, "Emily, is there something going on with you and Ryan?" Her face changed immediately. "What?" she asked. I repeated the question. She actually laughed. "He's just a coworker." I said, "Okay," but she wasn't finished. "No, seriously, you're being weird," I told her. "I didn't say you were doing anything," she replied. "You don't have to say it." We sat there in silence for a moment before she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You trust me, right?" I looked at her and said yes, and I meant it. At least I thought I did. 3 days later, Emily left for work early because she had an important presentation. I was working from home that morning when I realized she'd forgotten her laptop charger. I went upstairs to grab it from the bedroom. While looking through the closet, I noticed an old shoebox pushed behind a stack of winter clothes. I pulled it out because I thought maybe the charger was inside. It wasn't, but underneath some old photographs was a phone. Not Emily's usual phone, a different phone. I stood there holding it, staring at the black screen. For several seconds, I didn't touch anything. Then the screen suddenly lit up. There was no password notification. One message appeared. It was from Ryan. I read the first line, then read it again. And suddenly, every time Emily had told me I was being paranoid started making sense. I stared at the message for what felt like a full minute, trying to convince myself there had to be some innocent explanation. The message from Ryan said, "You need to tell him before I do. I'm tired of pretending this is nothing." I felt a strange pressure in my chest, but I still didn't open the phone. I actually put it back in the shoebox and walked downstairs. Part of me wanted to believe that if I didn't look, whatever was happening couldn't become real. But another part of me knew that finding a secret phone hidden behind winter clothes wasn't exactly normal. I stood in the kitchen staring at the coffee machine, wondering how long Emily had been hiding it. Then I heard my own voice in my head asking the question I had been avoiding for weeks. Why would my wife need a second phone to talk to a coworker? I picked up the phone again. There were dozens of unread messages. Most were from Ryan. I opened the conversation, and the first few messages weren't romantic at all. They were about work, meetings, presentations, deadlines. Then I scrolled further. The tone changed. Ryan had written, "I don't like lying to him." Emily replied, "You don't understand. I'm trying to figure things out." Ryan answered, "You've been saying that for months." I felt sick. Months? Whatever this was, it hadn't started recently. I kept scrolling, but I stopped when I saw Emily's message from 2 weeks earlier. He still thinks everything is fine. I can't tell him yet. I put the phone down. My hands were shaking, and I realized I was breathing faster than normal. I wanted to call Emily immediately, but I knew that if I confronted her without understanding what I was looking at, she could explain away every message. So I took pictures of the screen with my own phone. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed something concrete. I needed to know whether I was looking at an affair or something else. Then I saw a message from Ryan that made me stop. "Are you sure you're going through with Friday?" Emily had replied, "Yes. After Friday, everything changes." Friday was 2 days away. I stared at that sentence again and again. What was happening Friday? Was she planning to leave me? Was she meeting Ryan? Was there something even bigger going on? I couldn't think straight. When Emily came home that evening, I acted normal. She walked into the kitchen, kissed me on the cheek, and asked how my day had been. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She had spent months hiding a phone from me, and now she was standing there asking about my afternoon like nothing had happened. I said work had been busy. She smiled and started making dinner. Then, while she was chopping vegetables, she casually said, "Friday might be a late night." I froze for half a second. "Why?" I asked. "Big project at work. Ryan and I have to finish some things." I looked at her carefully. "Just you and Ryan?" She stopped chopping. "Why does that matter?" I shrugged. "It doesn't. Just asking." She gave me that same tired expression I'd seen before. "You're doing it again." I said nothing. She went back to chopping vegetables, but I noticed her hand was trembling slightly. That night, after she fell asleep, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the message. After Friday, everything changes. Around 2 in the morning, I finally got out of bed and checked the second phone again. There was a new message from Ryan. "I know you're scared, but you can't keep doing this to him." Underneath it, Emily had replied with only 5 words. "He deserves to know the truth." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then another message appeared. "Especially before the appointment." Appointment? I had no idea what they were talking about. And for the first time, I realized something terrifying. Maybe Ryan wasn't the secret I was supposed to be worried about. Maybe Ryan knew something about my wife that I didn't know at all. The word appointment stayed in my head all night. By morning, I had barely slept, and I was exhausted enough to feel like I was moving through the house on autopilot. Emily was already dressed when I walked into the kitchen. She was drinking coffee and scrolling through her regular phone, completely calm. I watched her for a few seconds before asking, "What appointment do you have Friday?" She looked up so quickly that I knew I'd hit something. "What appointment?" she asked. I leaned against the counter. "You said you had something after work." She stared at me, then gave a small laugh. "I don't know what you're talking about." That answer told me more than any confession could have. I didn't push her. I just nodded and left for work. During my lunch break, I looked through the pictures I'd taken of the second phone. I noticed something I'd missed before. Ryan had mentioned a clinic. There was an address attached to one of his messages, and when I searched it, I discovered it was a private medical office across town. I immediately started imagining the worst. Maybe Emily was pregnant. Maybe Ryan was the father. Maybe the appointment was connected to some secret relationship they'd been carrying on behind my back. I hated myself for thinking it, but I couldn't stop. That afternoon, I decided I needed answers before confronting her. When Emily came home, she was unusually quiet. She barely touched dinner and kept checking the time. Finally, she said, "I need to tell you something." My entire body tensed. I put my fork down and waited. She looked at me for several seconds before saying, "I haven't been completely honest with you." I thought that was it. I thought she was finally going to admit everything. Instead, she said, "Work has been really overwhelming lately." I almost laughed. "That's what you need to tell me?" Her face went pale. "What do you mean?" I pushed my chair back. "How long have you been talking to Ryan outside of work?" She stared at me. Then she whispered, "You went through my phone." "Your regular phone?" "No." I paused. "The other one." The color disappeared from her face completely. She knew exactly what I meant. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Emily stood up and said, "Where did you find it?" I couldn't believe that was her first question. "That doesn't matter." She shook her head. "It does." "Why?" I asked. "Because you weren't supposed to find it." That sentence hurt more than I expected. I told her I had seen the messages and asked her what was happening. Emily sat down slowly and covered her face with both hands. "Ryan and I aren't having an affair," she finally said. I didn't believe her. "Then why do you have a secret phone?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" She didn't answer. I asked again, louder this time. Scared of what, Emily? She finally looked at me and said, I was trying to protect you. That made absolutely no sense. I told her she had one chance to explain everything. She took a shaky breath and said, Ryan found out something about me at work, something medical. I didn't want you to know until I had all the answers. I felt the anger drain out of me for a moment. What medical thing? She looked away. I have an appointment Friday. I remembered the message, the clinic, the appointment, but then she said something that made the whole situation even more confusing. Ryan isn't the reason I hid the phone. She paused. He's the reason I was able to keep it hidden. I stared at her, completely lost. Then my regular phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it and there was a single message. You need to stop believing everything Emily tells you. Underneath it was a photo. It was Emily and Ryan standing outside the clinic together. And the photo had been taken that morning. I stared at the photo until I could barely make sense of what I was looking at. Emily and Ryan were standing outside the clinic together, exactly like the message had claimed. I looked at the timestamp. It had been taken that morning, while Emily had told me she was at work. I turned my phone toward her and asked, What's this? Her face went completely blank. She didn't even try to deny being there. You went to the clinic this morning? I asked. She nodded slowly. Yes. And you told me you were working. She lowered her eyes. I know. That answer made me angrier than a lie would have. So why should I believe anything you say now? Emily started crying, but I didn't move toward her. I needed answers more than I needed to comfort her. She finally said, Because I wasn't meeting Ryan for myself. I asked what that was supposed to mean. She wiped her face and explained that Ryan's younger sister had been diagnosed with a serious illness several months earlier, and Ryan had been helping his family deal with medical bills and appointments. Emily had discovered a workplace charity program that could help, and she'd been secretly working with Ryan to get his sister approved. I almost felt relieved, but something still didn't fit. Then why hide the phone from me? I asked. Emily looked at the floor. Because the program wasn't the only thing. She told me that during one of the medical screenings, she had received unexpected results of her own. The doctors had found something that needed further testing. She hadn't told me because she was terrified. She didn't know if it was serious, and she didn't want me to spend weeks worrying over something that might turn out to be nothing. I wanted to believe her, but then I remembered all the messages I'd seen. What about Ryan saying you needed to tell me before he did? Emily closed her eyes. He was angry with me. Why? She hesitated. Because he thought I was making the wrong choice by keeping you in the dark. That made more sense, but I still couldn't explain the unknown text I'd received. Someone had taken that photo of Emily and Ryan and deliberately sent it to me. Who sent me this? I asked. Emily shook her head. I don't know. Then her expression changed. Wait. She grabbed her phone and opened a message. Ryan sent me something this morning. She showed me the screen. Ryan had written, Someone was watching us outside the clinic. I think they followed you. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just about my wife hiding a medical problem anymore. Someone had been following her. I asked Emily why she hadn't told me about any of this, and she finally admitted the real reason. She was afraid I would look at her differently if the tests came back bad. She thought I would become her caretaker instead of her husband. Hearing that broke through some of my anger. I sat beside her, but I still couldn't forget the secret phone. You should have told me, I said quietly. I know, she whispered. I was scared. We sat in silence until my phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number appeared. This time there was no photo, just 6 words. Ryan isn't telling you everything either. I looked at Emily. She saw the message and went pale. Don't answer it, she whispered. But before I could respond, another notification appeared. It was a photo of Ryan standing alone in a parking garage. Someone had circled his car in red. Under the picture was one sentence. Ask your wife why Ryan has been meeting her father. I stared at those words, completely confused. My father-in-law had been dead for 3 years. There was no way Ryan could have been meeting him, unless the person sending these messages knew something we didn't. And suddenly, the medical appointment wasn't the only secret I wanted answers to. I read the message 3 times. Ask your wife why Ryan has been meeting her father. My father-in-law had been dead for 3 years. There was no way that sentence could be true, and for a few seconds I wondered if whoever was texting me was simply trying to scare me. Emily took my phone and stared at the message. That's impossible, she whispered. Exactly, I said. So what is this person talking about? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened her regular phone and called Ryan. He answered almost immediately. Emily put him on speaker. Ryan, "Someone is sending my husband pictures and messages," she said. There was a long silence. Then Ryan asked, "What did they say?" I read the message aloud. Ryan didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, "You need to tell him." Emily looked at me. "Tell me what?" I asked. Ryan sighed. "The man in that picture isn't your father-in-law." I looked at Emily, confused. "Then who is he?" Ryan said, "It's your father-in-law's brother, Daniel." I had never heard the name before. Emily immediately interrupted him. "Ryan, stop." But it was too late. I asked why Ryan would even know about some relative I'd never met. He explained that Daniel had been helping Emily with something connected to the medical testing. I felt like I was being dragged deeper into a story where everyone knew the rules except me. "What does this have to do with my wife?" I asked. Ryan went quiet again. Then he said, "Emily wasn't at that clinic because she was sick." Emily closed her eyes. "Ryan," he continued, "she was there because she was trying to find out whether something your father left behind could explain what happened to her mother." I stared at my wife. She finally admitted there was another secret. After her father died, Emily had found an old envelope among his belongings. Inside were medical records, a handwritten note, and a name she didn't recognize. The records suggested that her mother had been diagnosed with a hereditary condition years before Emily was born. Emily had spent months trying to understand whether she might have inherited it. Ryan had helped because his sister's medical treatment had connected him with people who could help them navigate the testing process. The secret phone was mostly being used to communicate with him without turning every conversation into something I could overhear. I was still hurt, but now I understood why she'd been hiding things. Then I asked the question that mattered most. "So why did someone send me that picture?" Neither of them had an answer. Ryan said he would come over and explain everything in person. About 20 minutes later, he arrived at our house. I expected some arrogant guy I'd finally get to confront, but Ryan looked exhausted and nervous. He sat across from me and said, "I'm sorry you found out this way." I asked him if he had ever slept with my wife. He looked directly at me and said, "No." Emily started crying again, but I kept my eyes on Ryan. He told me that the person sending the messages had contacted him too. At first, Ryan thought it was someone trying to extort money from Emily. But then the messages became more specific. They mentioned the clinic, Emily's medical records, and even details about her father's belongings that only a few people could have known. Then Ryan pulled out his phone and showed me the latest message he'd received. It said, "Tell him about the envelope." I looked at Emily. She slowly nodded. "I found another envelope last night," she said. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. On it was a name, a date, and a sentence written in her father's handwriting. I read it twice before I understood what it meant. The note said, "If Emily ever starts asking questions, make sure she knows the truth about her mother." I looked at my wife. For weeks, I had thought I was investigating an affair. Instead, I was discovering that my wife had been hiding a family secret she was terrified to reveal. But before I could ask what the note meant, my phone buzzed again. The unknown number had sent one final message. "You're looking in the wrong place. The person who betrayed Emily is much closer than Ryan." I slowly looked around the room. Emily was sitting beside me. Ryan was across from us. And suddenly, I realized there was one person who had known about the envelope long before any of us did. My wife's older brother, Mark. Mark had always been the last person I would have suspected. He was Emily's older brother, the guy who had helped their mother through her final years and handled most of the family paperwork after their father died. I called him that night and asked if he knew anything about an envelope their father had left behind. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Mark said, "Where did you hear about that?" That was enough for me. I put the call on speaker, and Emily sat beside me listening. I asked him what he knew, but he kept avoiding the question until Ryan interrupted and told him we already knew about the medical records. Mark finally admitted that their father had discovered years earlier that their mother had been exposed to a genetic condition that could affect her children. But there was another part of the story nobody had told Emily. Their mother had never been told the full truth because their father believed knowing about the condition would destroy her emotionally. Mark had found the records after their father's death and had been terrified that Emily would discover them. The person sending the anonymous messages wasn't a stranger at all. It was Mark. He admitted that he had been following Emily because he wanted to know how much she discovered. And when he saw her with Ryan at the clinic, he panicked. Instead of talking to her, he tried to scare her into stopping the investigation. The hidden phone suddenly made sense too. Emily had been using it because Ryan was helping her find answers. But she had also been afraid that Mark might discover what they were doing. I asked Mark why he had sent me the messages instead of simply telling the truth. His voice cracked when he answered, "Because I thought if you believed Ryan was dangerous, you'd make her stop." I was furious. He had manipulated me into believing my wife was cheating when she had actually been trying to understand something frightening about her own health and family. I turned to Emily and apologized for every time I'd called her secretive or accused her of lying. She looked at me through tears and said, "I should have trusted you enough to tell you." I told her she was right, but I also understood why she'd been scared. The next morning, Emily went to the clinic for her appointment. I went with her. Ryan stayed out of it completely, and Mark agreed to speak with the doctor and provide the records he had been hiding. Hours later, we finally received the answer we'd been waiting for. Emily had inherited the condition, but it was treatable, and the doctors had caught it early. She wasn't facing the future we'd feared. She needed monitoring and treatment, but she was going to be okay. When we left the clinic, Emily held my hand so tightly that neither of us said anything for several minutes. The strange thing was that the secret phone that had almost destroyed my marriage had actually been connected to the reason my wife was still going to get the help she needed. A week later, Emily deleted the second phone in front of me. Not because I demanded it, but because she said she never wanted us to have secrets like that again. Ryan and I eventually spoke privately, and I apologized for assuming the worst about him. He told me he understood why I had been suspicious and that he would probably have felt the same way. As for Mark, Emily stopped speaking to him for several months. Eventually, she agreed to meet him, but only after he admitted everything and apologized without making excuses. Our marriage didn't magically become perfect after that. Trust had been damaged and rebuilding it took time, but we started talking more honestly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Looking back, the hidden phone wasn't the thing that nearly ended our marriage. The secrecy was. Emily thought hiding the truth would protect me. Mark thought manipulating me would protect Emily. And I thought suspicion would protect me from being betrayed. In the end, all three of us were wrong. The one thing that actually helped was finally telling the truth, even when it was painful. I still remember standing in that bedroom with the second phone in my hand, convinced I had discovered an affair. I had no idea that one message would lead me somewhere completely different. So if you were in my position, would you have opened that phone? Or would you have respected your spouse's privacy and walked away? Because honestly, even now, I'm not sure I would make the same choice twice.